Welcome back everybody to another video. So this time we're going to do a little editing tutorial, and I'm also going to show you guys how to upload the presets and import them into both Lightrooms, Lightroom Classic and Lightroom. I've had a couple questions about importing them and getting them onto Lightroom, so I just wanted to clarify, make a little quick video in the beginning so you guys can see how it's done. And yeah, so I got 10 photos from the last couple POVs that I did that I'm going to be editing with you guys. And I'm going to use the presets, so for anyone who's bought them, or if anyone that is planning to buy them in the future, you can kind of go along with this video and get used to those presets. Alright, so just to start off, let's go to my website, alright? So when you go to my website, you can click the presets tab up on the top corner here, and you'll have two options, which is the Lightroom presets, which are just like the normal presets. I believe there's 9 of those when you click that. And then you also have the color grading, which is the stuff I use afterwards to kind of create different moods, to kind of set a different tone for each image. So at nighttime I use a couple different ones, during the day I use some other ones, but recently I've been using mood and cinema for a lot of my edits, just because I really like how it looks. But you know, I like to change things up sometimes. So once you guys purchase the preset, you guys are going to get is 2 zip files that you're going to be able to download. So if you get both, you get 2, but 1 per each. So I have them saved here. So once you double click on your zip, right, it's going to pop up and you're going to have a whole folder full of all of the presets. So those will pop up, and then you have them on your desktop, wherever you're going to keep them. So on Lightroom Classic, I'm going to open Lightroom Classic up. I just prefer to use Lightroom Classic. I'm just used to it. I know Lightroom, the other version, is a little bit more popular. It's kind of just an easier flowing software, I guess, is what Adobe says. But I don't know. Personally, I just prefer using Classic because I'm used to it. But Lightroom connects with your phone and your tablet. So if you put your presets onto the Lightroom app, or onto the Lightroom software here, it'll automatically sync up with your phone. So if you use your phone or use a tablet or iPad, you can automatically have all of the presets just show up there, which is pretty cool. So we'll do Lightroom Classic first. So if you go to Develop, right here on the left-hand side, there's going to be a plus button on the top of your presets panel. When you click that, you can click Import Presets, and you can go to your whatever your files are. So desktop, and they're going to be under Photo.Tripps presets. You go to color grading, and then you have all of them there. So you can just select all of them by clicking one, and then clicking Shift. Go to the bottom one, and you select all of them, and then just click Import, and they'll all show up right there. It's pretty simple and easy. They made it pretty fast nowadays compared to what it used to be like. For Lightroom, not Lightroom Classic, Lightroom, this one's a little bit different. So when you go to see your images here, you're going to go to the right hand corner, and you'll see 2 dots that kind of mesh over together that look like a mask. That's where your presets are going to be. So you click that up top here, and then you're going to click the 3 dotted menu button. And then in there, it's going to say Import Presets, and the same thing is going to pop up. You can go to Desktop, go to your files that I sent you guys, click that, and then you can click Import, and it will just show up right there. So that's a quick and easy way to show you guys how to import and get your files on there, all right? So let me close this up because I don't need to worry about that. I don't really use this. The only time I ever use Lightroom is when I want to put photos on there when I know I'm not going to be home, and then I can edit them on the iPad and stuff, so I can at least be doing something when I'm away from home. So let's open up Lightroom Classic. Alright, I got 10 photos here. This one's from the Pro Mist filter POV that I did, I guess it's almost a month now. And I picked one image from this POV. I really like this picture of this old guy walking, and he's in the sunlight. There's some kind of cool dramatic things going on there in the image, you know? So we're going to start off, and I always go to the presets first. So recently I've been using Retro 1 a lot and Retro 2. Those are like my two go-tos. And Retro Flat is also a really good starting point if you want to kind of just make it your own. That one's a little bit more just base, and you can really build from there. Retro 1 and Retro 2 just have a little bit different vibe. So let's just start off with Retro 1. We're going to click that. And you're going to have to go and change the white balance if you like. You don't have to do the tint, but the temperature is kind of important. So sometimes you want something to be more warm or you want it to be cooler. So for this, I'm going to make it a little bit more warm. All right, bring it to like 9,000 Kelvin. Let's bring up the exposure a little bit. And this is just like a quick base just to kind of get the image where I like. And then I'm going to start doing some of my masks and stuff like that. All right, so usually I like to do the subject first. So you're going to click subject. Lightroom does a really good job of using AI to find that nowadays. So I'm going to brighten him up a little bit. So let's brighten him up. And then I like to use the radial gradient tool to kind of create a vignette around whatever my subject's going to be. So we're going to darken up those corners a little bit. And then I'm going to bring a linear gradient off to the side here. And what this is going to do is create some artificial light that I'm going to create coming through. So you can kind of really like accentuate that the light's coming through from the right hand side. So I'm going to crank that up a little bit. And on the top, usually I would like to subtract. It's not too bad, but just for the sake of the video, up here, you can add or subtract to your mask. So I'm going to click subtract, I click brush, and we're just going to brush away some of the stuff up top. We don't need it to be as dramatic up there, and we just want the light popping through here. I'm also going to take my brush, and we're going to draw roughly over all of the highlight section, so on the ground at least. So all these lights here, let's just brush them out a little bit. And also, if you look at my brush size and everything here, this is typically what I leave it at. If you want your brush size to get bigger, you can obviously go over here or just scroll on your mouse. If you use a scroll, you can get it bigger and smaller. I keep the density around 75 because I don't want it to be 100. It just gets way too punchy too fast. The only time I use 100 is when I'm erasing something. So we're at 75, and let's just bring those highlights up a little bit by adjusting the exposure, like one stop. We're going to go 1, and then I think I'm going to just use the white and bring that up slightly. All right. And let's go with the radial tool again, but we're not going to invert it. So last time I inverted it so it can kind of create a vignette. So when you want to do that, you right click on the center and invert will pop up. But for this, we're just going to keep it normal and just bump up the exposure a little bit just to brighten up that guy. And honestly, I think that looks pretty cool. So once I get all of those masks done and I get the baseline editing done, I like to go to the color grading stuff. So like I said, mood is what I've been using a lot lately, which is this. And then Cine is another one I like, which is a little bit more punchy yellows and blues. But we're going to stick with mood. And then up here you can see the amount. So right, it's always at 100. But if you want to like make it a little bit more drastic, you can go all the way to 200. But that changes the colors and stuff. And then 0 is like no effect. So I think 100 looked pretty good. But let's just go up like to 1. Let's go to 110. And I'm pretty happy with that. So mood gives it like a slight little green yellowish tint overall, and I think that kind of looks like a film photo or like a film different type of film process. So, you know, Kodak has Portra 400, has Portra 160, Portra 800. All of those different types of films kind of have their own unique characteristics. And I like Mood because it kind of brings some of that out. So we're going to stick with that, and then that's basically it right there. I think that looks pretty sweet. So just to see the before and after, let's get rid of that. So that's before and that's after. You know, I come a long way. Sometimes some of your pictures get a little bit underexposed, and Lightroom, especially when you're shooting raw, you can bring all of that back. So let's do the next POV, which is the same thing, the Pro Mist filter, but at nighttime in Chinatown, which honestly, I got some awesome shots. I'm really happy with this night. Even though my camera started getting a little bit weird, I got a lot of really good shots. So let's start off again. Let's start off with Retro 2. We're going to do that first. And I'm going to bring down the exposure a little bit. Let's bring the temp down slightly. Vibrance is good. Clarity is at like 23. I like to just take a little bit of that clarity out, because when it's at 0, it's just a little bit too sharp. You know, like you want it to look a little dreamy. At least that's my style. So let's bring it back to, oh, that's plus 23. Let's bring it back to minus 23. And that's a good base point. So let's do the subject again, get the guy highlighted on the bike, and we're going to bring that up. I like to really just not overexpose, but make the subject pop. So we're going to bring it to like 0.6. I think that looks pretty good. And we're going to do the same thing with the radial gradient tool. We're going to invert it, right click, invert, and bring that exposure down. You can just see it. Your eye just wants to go straight to the middle of the picture now. We brighten up that subject and we darken the background a little bit, and it just pops. So after that, I really like the lights up here and the color that's coming from the lights. So we're going to just roughly highlight that. You know, you could be more diligent when you're doing it, but for the sake of the video, I'm just going to go back and forth. Try to get most of the lights, nothing crazy. Get a little bit of that car light there and on the bottom. And let's bring up the exposure slightly, and I'm also going to bring the temperature up, so the warmth. And we're going to go to like 20, we'll go to 30. So we got that on 30. And I'm going to darken up the image going from the left corner up. So I'm going to bring that exposure down there. That looks pretty cool. Let's go look at our color grading stuff. We got the blue, Cine, cool tones, which is like mostly blue tones, film vibes, which is so I said the mood kind of brings that film aspect to it, but I think film vibes is a little bit more punchy. Green tone, as you expect, is greens. Light, it's just like a little burst of light kind of stuff going on. It has a little bit of pinks. If you look, so let's click light real quick, right? Click light, you come down here to the color grading. We got some blues and some yellows, and it's nothing too drastic. I didn't even touch the midtones on this one. Mood, what we were using before, we got orange, pink tone, and then warm. I think warm looks pretty cool for this. I also have a reset up top, so if you go to the top one and click reset, it just takes it away, so you don't have to go back, do Command Z. I know that's pretty easy, but at least you know that it's gone. So let's do warm tone. I like that. Let's go back to our basic settings. Bring up the exposure a little bit. Excuse me. Got a little bit of a hiccup there. We're going to bring in the highlights. Bring up the shadows a tad. I think that looks pretty good. I don't really mess with the tone curves. I used to do tone curves like only to start off every single edit, but I realized that it's not as necessary. You can achieve most of that stuff without using them. But if you think that for some images you really want to kind of fade it out a little bit, you could do that by bringing up the darks and the shadows and making it a little bit lighter. It gives you that faded look. But you can also achieve that by bringing the contrast down on just your normal settings up top, just the basic settings. So I think that looks pretty sweet. So we'll move on from here. And the next image I have is from the same POV. And this one's a little bit underexposed, so we're going to fix that. I had the 24-70 on there at 2.8. Let's see, the settings will be up top here. So I had ISO 1000 at 55.1 millimeters, 2.8 at a 60th of a second. So slower shutter speed just to kind of keep some of that light. But let's bring it back into the image, at least for the subject and stuff. So same thing. I think retro flat looks kind of cool. So flat greens is a derivative of retro flat, but I bumped the greens up. So if you have any greens in the image, this one looks pretty sweet. Like, we'll go here just to show you. So the flat greens, just to bring up the exposure, makes it a little bit more poppy in the green section of the image. So let me go back, undo that. All right, so that looks cool. The portrait one I have is more of a film vibe. It has some grain in there. It's not for everyone, but it's kind of a cool base. And if you use it in a certain scenario with some proper lighting, it looks awesome. So let's do flat greens. Why not? And you can see up top here that the greens are really popping. So retro green, we're gonna play around with it a little bit. Let's bring that exposure up a tad, our highlights up a tad. And you can see with the Pro Mist filter, everything's kind of diffused up top where the lights are coming in, and it looks sweet. So we'll keep that. Obviously, we can't really get rid of it, but our clarity is a little bit less on this one. It's at -16. Bring the highlights up. We just did that. I'm going to keep the shadows down a little bit. Whites and blacks we'll keep as is at the moment. And then let's do your subject. Brighten that up a tad. Same thing. Like, I like using the radial gradient just to bring the viewer in. So we do the invert, darken that background, and I just think it makes the subject pop, which is pretty sweet. And we'll use the line or the linear gradient tool from the bottom again, just to darken that up. And let's see what else we can do. So I'm going to take the brush out and just finely, just a little bit in all those highlights on the ground. Up in the corner there, by the stairs, in the background over here, on the ottoman there. Let's bring those out. Kind of just adds a little bit more depth and makes those dark tones in the shadows a lot darker. So we'll keep that like that. Let's look at our color grading. The stain looks pretty cool. Mood, I'm really liking mood lately, but we'll stay away from that just for the sake of the video. Let's do cool tones. I like that flat look for this image, honestly. And I think we can bring up our temp a little bit again. So we'll go to like 9500 Kelvin for that. And I'm also going to start playing with the light up here. So let's take the brush out again. Those lights. I'm going to bring down the exposure a little bit. Bring up the contrast. But then we're going to bring the whites out. So bringing down the exposure is going to give you a little bit more detail back in that Pro Mist filter area. But once you put the white, it's going to make that center of the bulb or whatever the light source is coming from like look really vibrant, which is cool. So we'll keep that as is. And the top of the image is pretty dark already, but let's just make it a little bit more dark just to kind of focus us in right to the middle of the image, which is our subject, the person walking. and those two signs of lights right there. And I think that's pretty sweet. So we'll move on to the next one. And this one is in Little Italy. It's not exactly straight, so we'll use our auto crop correction alignment and just tweak it a little bit. That looks pretty good. I have this sliver of white from, I don't know, one of those restaurant things on the sidewalk, and I'm going to get that out of the image. So we're going to crop that in a little bit. Boom. Any slivers on the side like that, they're just sticking out, there's no reason to keep them. It's just creating a little bit of annoyance for the image. And, you know, whenever there's little imperfections around the corners like that, sometimes that might lead the viewer and their eyes to that section. So we don't want that. Let's do Retro 2, which is a little bit more warm. We'll bring up those warm tones a little bit on the temp. Let's bring up our exposure slightly. Let's see what else. Our highlights, we're going to bring up shadows, bring down a tad. I'm liking that. Alright, so whenever I see water on the ground, I always use my brush to brighten it up, especially with reflections. Because the reflections usually are not as bright compared to the actual lights. And it makes that reflection stand out even more if it's almost the same temperature or same lighting. So we're gonna brighten that up a little bit to kind of match up top, and I think that just makes it pop a lot more. We got our subject in the middle here. I'm not gonna select the subject this time. I'm just gonna use the radial gradient and brighten up the center, and then I'm gonna come back, use another one, make it a little bit bigger, put it over our subject, invert it, and let's do that vignette again. And you see, it just darkens up all the corners nicely, and now the viewer's just punched right into the center of the photo. So I'm liking that. We'll keep that as is. And I'm going to go in with the brush and just touch some of those highlights, some of those lights in the background, up top a little bit. Bring up the exposure, and I think that looks pretty sweet. Let's look at the color grading. So yeah, whenever I finish all of those edits and stuff, the color grading is just the last little final touch, just to change the mood. So right now, nighttime, rainy, we got cool tones to kind of bring that industrial vibe, but these lights have a really nice orange yellow hue to them. So let's use something that is going to bring that out. Orange would work well. City's going to bring out a little more yellow. And I think orange or warm would be good. So let's do orange. I want to stick with that orange vibe. We're going to bring the amount up a little bit to like 140-ish. So 140, we're at 141. And I think that looks pretty sweet. You come in, you can go and check out everything. Obviously zoom in on the image. But it looks pretty dope. So I'm happy with that. I got 2 more night photos for you guys from this. So this one isn't like the most interesting image, but I want to show you guys how using the presets can kind of turn something that is a little bit bland and just make it pop, make it stand out more. So let's do Retro 1 again, and already you can just see that faded look. It's got that old school kind of vibe. So we're going to bring up the exposure, and as soon as you bring up the exposure and you're using a mist filter like that, those blooms and that diffusion just stands out even more. I mean, look at the sign, the Cappy thing, the lights in the background from that shop, the gift shop, looks awesome. So bring up the exposure a little bit. We're going to bring down the contrast a tad, just a little bit. And I'm enjoying that vibe right now. So let's do the radial tool here. And I'm going to bring it across this whole lit section, and we're going to brighten it up even more. So let's go up to like 0.3. And my bread and butter, guys. Radial tool. Oop. Invert. Let's get those corners. I know vignette is a pretty like basic tool. I mean, even like the Lightroom mobile just has like a vignette tool. I know it's pretty basic, but if you use it in the right way and you don't overdo it, so like, you know, you're doing like a daytime picture and just absolutely make the corners dark, it's going to look silly, obviously. But if you do it properly with a little bit of taste, it can really help make the center or the subject of your image just pop out even more. So, you know, just the corners are dark, and we can bring back some of those highlights if we want. Like on the ground here, I want to bring back some of that. Those sidewalk strips, those white strips down here, we'll bring some of that back. Some of the water and the reflections on the ground, we'll bring that back. Get our exposure going up. And you can always go back and touch it again. So we're at density 75, so it's not going to be like full strength right away. So bring up that exposure, see what you like, play around with it. I'm going to bring it down a little bit now since we did another layer on top. And these cool little lights up top that are hanging up in these like little, not Christmas lights, but little festive lights up top. We're just going to click all of those. And that didn't do much, so I'm going to make a separate layer for the brush here. Because that was on the same layer as everything I did on the ground. And sometimes, you know, you want to have a greater exposure for a separate subject. So we got all of those masked, and we're just going to bump up the exposure. And now those stand out a little bit more, which is cool, especially with that darkened background up top. And then let's go to our color grading, the final step, you know, that little cherry on top, the thing that just makes the image kind of pop even more. And this is why I started using them recently, because it just brings a whole nother element to your images. Because right now, when you leave it as is, it looks good. But when you start playing with the midtones, the shadows, the highlights, and changing the colors within those areas, it can kind of transform the image from just being a little bit bland to something else. So with mood, those lights inside just kind of have a slight green tint to them, which makes it look a little bit retro, which is cool. Film vibes, it's a little bit more punchy in color. Cine, same thing. We're going straight blues, straight yellows. I think that looks pretty dope, honestly. So we're going to do that, but I'm going to just bring it down a tad. So obviously we start at 100. Let's go to like 80. And I think that looks pretty sweet. I'm going to bring up the exposure on our basic settings up a little bit. And I'm happy with that. Alright, so let's move on to the next image, which is this nighttime picture from the same POV. And it's pretty dark in the shadows and stuff, but I really like how the Pro Mist filters really made those colors and those lights pop. So we're going to try to accentuate that. And I'm going to stick with Retro 1. So we're going to do that again. Let's go up on the exposure a little bit, bring up our highlights. And I'm going to go to the masking section and do some of that right now. So that top walk sign is a little bit dark, and I would like it to match everything else a little bit better. So let's bring up the exposure on that so it kind of matches the signs below. And we can bring in some of the highlights down in these paper lanterns and this little menu sign on the side here and some of the lights in the background. And I'm also going to create a new brush for the car. And we're just going to do the windshield and the hood where the light's really actually affecting it, because we can keep those shadows in the car, which will look pretty cool. So we'll do that. Do another radial gradient, invert it, just to darken those corners up a little bit. And that looks pretty sweet. So let's see, we got Cine, mood. I think Cine looks pretty sweet for our color grading. So let's do that. And I'm gonna boost it up a little bit to make those blues kind of stand out. So we're gonna go to 125. Now let's bring down the contrast a little bit because it is getting a little dark in some of those spots. I think that looks pretty good. I know some of the editing I've been doing is a little bit more of the same, but it's just to show in different scenarios how you can utilize those same tools, you know. So let's move on to the next image, and this is going to be from the Highline video. And it was pretty cool because once you get off the bridge on that Highline extension, there's this opening up where you have restaurants, some shops, some new little areas to sit down, which is cool. But I saw these reflective like glass siding when you come off of the bridge with the Highline and that new extension, and it really created a cool reflection effect. I know some of the other images I got had people in them in cars, which looked cool, but I just wanted to show you guys this one, which is a little bit more simple. So let's start off with, we're going to just do Retro 2. Alright, let's get this thing lined up a little bit. That's not perfect. Let's do that. Let's get our metal in the center of the frame. Boom. And honestly, I'm just going to not do our basic editing right now. And I'm going to go straight to the masks, and I'm going to highlight every single white strip and panel. What that's going to do once we bring up the exposure and some of the whites and highlights, it's going to really make those white lines pop, which is going to create some dimension to the photo. That black background, which is the concrete, is going to seem darker even though we're not making it darker, which is going to create a little extra layer to make the depth in the photo look three-dimensional. So let's add some exposure there. Let's do some highlights, do whites, and that looks pretty sweet. And I like this dark corner up there, so let's do the same thing we've been doing with the radial gradient tool. Do our little vignette, darken that up. But I don't want that to affect the glass too much, because I want the glass to mimic the same kind of exposure as the ground. So we're going to brighten that up a little bit, just to keep that reflection looking a little bit more sharp. So we'll brighten that up. That looks pretty good. And let's see our color grading just to see where we're at with that. I'm not going to use like Cine or some of the other ones like pink, because I want this to look a little bit more natural. And I think Mood blue looks good. We'll do blue. So this blue one here is going to be some cooler tones. I know we have a cool tones one, which is more blue, and the blue is going to be same thing but just less saturation in our blues. So we're going to stick that on there. Let's bring up our exposure a little bit, and I think that looks pretty sweet. This is a pretty simple shot, you know, nothing crazy, but we're just using some of those techniques to achieve some of those contrasts and different elements in the photo we want to come out, which is the white painted lines on the street. The next photo, which I'm pumped about, is the New Yorker shot. So let's get this bad boy lined up. And I've passed this building many times coming out of the Lincoln Tunnel, and I've never really got a chance to walk over there. So this past POV, I was like, screw it, let's just walk over there, get some shots of it. I have the 70-200, so you should get some pretty close-in shots, and I'm pretty happy with them. So let's dive into this. We're gonna do, let's see, when I first edited this photo, I used Retro 1, and I really did like how it came out. I mean, any of these will work, but we're gonna just do the same thing. I like this kind of tone right now, and let's bring up the temperature a little bit to 8300 Kelvin, and bring up our exposure a little bit. So with the Pro Mist filter, I've noticed that during the day, like midday when the sun's at its highest point, I don't know if it's really the ideal time to have it. I think sunset, sunrise, at night, it works awesome. But I think it's a little bit too washed out when you use it during the middle of the day. And you can kind of see in this picture, it's pretty faded. So we want to bring back some of that contrast, some of those details. And first things first, we're going to go to the masking, and we'll worry about some of those basic settings, but we just did exposure to start off and changed our white balance and our temperature. We're going to take the brush out, and we're going to go over all of these shadows in the building. And what that's going to do, once we darken the shadows, it's going to really make the building look three-dimensional. It's going to pop out way more. So we got these darker patterns here. I mean, this corner here is already really dark, so you probably don't have to worry about it too much, but for the sake of the video, let's just go ahead and do it. I did that in the original edit. Some of these buildings here, just get all those shadows highlighted. And, oh, wrong button. Let's zoom in. Let's make our brush a little bigger. And we're still at the 75 density for my brush. Get in there for the shadows. Hold the space bar down. You can drag the image around. And you don't have to be super exact. I'm not going to take my time going through every little crossbar and metal framing in the shadows, because honestly, like, when you do that and you get super meticulous with the details, it starts to look fake. You want to blend that in nicely, so we're just going to get all of this covered up. Boom, boom. A little bit under the letters and stuff. You just want to create the suggestion of more shadows. You don't have to be super exact with it. And we're also punched into what percent? We're at 200% right now, so this wouldn't be the typical way that someone would be viewing the image anyways. So let's get this side of the building here taken care of. Paint that up. Boom, boom, boom. Alright, so let's drop the exposure, and you already see the difference as you start bringing that exposure down. These are starting to get super dark. I mean, let's see what's on, off, on, off. And it really just brings some extra depth into the picture, and it makes the building look way more three-dimensional. Touch up some of those spots we see that are poking through. That looks good right now. Alright, so the sky is pretty bland. There's not really much going on. And it was a kind of hazy day with some of the wildfires still coming through, so there was no blue sky. It didn't look great, but you can take your temperature of that and turn it blue if you'd like. But I think we're going to stay with that kind of hazy vibe. Excuse me. With that hazy vibe. And we're going to go towards the warmer tones. Get that sky looking a little bit, you know, yellow, orangish. You can bring up our saturation a little bit. And that looks pretty cool. We're going to use our radial gradient. Focus up on the New Yorker. Invert that. Darken that up. And now it's really popping. Let's go back to our basic real quick. I'm going to bring up the exposure, which looks good. And the other issue I had with this image was I really wanted the red letters to kind of pop out more. They just look a little bit faded. And the way you can do that to manipulate the colors in an image is using the color range, which is Shift J if you want to do that. Or you can just go here and click it. So now you have this eyedropper tool, and you can click the red, and it's going to highlight all of the red in the image. So in a landscape and some other pictures, this might not work as well, but for architectural shots, buildings in the city, stuff like that, when you find little pops of color, you can use this tool to really bring out the color if you'd like. So we have all the New Yorker stuff highlighted, right? Now let's bring up some saturation here, and we're really going to make that pop. A little bit of exposure, nothing crazy. Some contrast just to keep it looking realistic. And let's go back. And you can see that really makes it pop. So this is with it on, off. And I think it just really adds another like little element to it that makes the letters stand out a lot more, which I was really going for in my first edit. And honestly, I was sitting here trying to figure out what I'm going to do, and I don't really use the range color tool. That's what it's called. Right? Let me double check. Color range. I don't really use the color range tool that often, but when I clicked it and played around with it, it was like, oh, this is pretty sweet. This is really useful, and it just made the image look a lot better. So let's go to our color grading for our final step. We got cool tones, mood, orange. I think the orange looks pretty cool. Stay with that wildfire kind of vibe. We'll just tone it down a little bit. So let's go to like 55 instead of 100. And let's bump up the exposure just a tad. So now all those highlighted sections in the building are really popping out, and it looks awesome. We got the shadows, which creates that depth of field, which makes the building just look more three-dimensional. And I think the New Yorker sign looks good, especially when you add that little pop to it. So we got a couple more images left from the same POV. This one is from that section of the video I was walking towards the train, and we got some cool reflection shots here with this puddle. Up on the top left corner there, we have a little sliver of something we don't need, so we're going to crop that out. And I think I'm going to go with, let's start with, let's do flat greens. And let's bring up our exposure a little bit. And I want these people to kind of look like silhouettes. I don't want to see too much definition in their face. I like that darkened look to them. And that's not typically like my style. Normally I would select the subject and try to bring out the details, but I thought it looked cool how they were just silhouettes and you can't really identify who they are, you know. So we're going to keep it like that. Bring out the highlights a little bit. And now for the sky, we're going to select the sky. And it kind of got blown out. We want to bring back some of those details. So we're going to use the contrast to get those details in the cloud. And the color is kind of gone, so let's bring down the temperature a little bit. And those blues. And we got some color back in the sky, which is nice. Let's focus on our reflection here. And we're going to just highlight all this water. And let's bring up the exposure there. And now it's starting to match the exposure of, you know, the top of the image, the non-reflective part. And when you start making them look exactly the same, it just creates an awesome, like not contrast, but it just makes it look identical. So the symmetry pops out even more when you bring out the details and some of the highlights in the water. Because if it stays dark, like we'll start here, if it stays dark, you're not getting the same effect. Yes, you are having a reflection, of course, but when you add that, it's going to mimic the top of the picture exactly with the same kind of exposure, which makes the reflection look way more symmetrical. So we'll do that. I don't really need all this green over here, but I think it balances out the photo because it's coming right to the middle almost. But let's darken some of that up. So we'll use linear gradient tool, darken that corner so we can bring the focus towards the middle. And we'll just use our radial tool again to make that just slight vignette. And I think that looks pretty sweet. This one wasn't too crazy, too much editing going on. I mean, for the sake of the video, let's just go a little bit further with it. We can go on our highlights here on the on the concrete. Bring up some of that highlight, and it just creates more separation. So now there's like 3 levels of separation on the ground here. You got the water, you have the highlight section, and the shadows. When everything's on a similar plane as an exposure or highlights, right, it becomes flat. So when you have shadows, you have a highlight section, you have a midtones, all of that, it's going to create more depth to your image. So you want to play around, use the brush, just try new things, try to see how you can affect and manipulate the light to actually create some more depth in your image. We'll go to our color grading. And I'm going to keep this one relatively simple. I think mood looks great. Keep those like kind of cooler tones, a little bit more retro-y. And what's really nice about the color grading, I know before I was talking about the different film styles and stuff like that. So film stocks, like 400, Portrait 400, Portrait 160, Portrait 800, you got Cinestill 400D, you got Cinestill 50D, you got Cinestill 800T, you know, Fuji 200, you got Kodak Gold 200. All of those have different properties which make the image look different. And I think with the color grading, it's kind of like adding that little filter on top, which makes the image look a little bit different and set apart from your other stuff. So we're always editing the same. I have my presets. I always edit everything the same with those presets. But using those different type of filters, you can create different moods. So with the cool tones, you know, at night or when it's raining, I like using that because it, you know, gives it like that Gotham kind of Batman vibe, which I like. But during the day, if you use some warmer tones, it makes it more happy, you know, with the sunset, stuff like that. It's a little bit more inviting. It just depends on what you're trying to show in your image, or what kind of message you're trying to give across. So for the last image, it's nothing crazy, it's simple, but I think that this is something I would have shot with my film camera because I really like all the different angles, the shadows. So let's start off. I'm doing retro one just like I did last time with my this is, if you guys haven't figured out yet, this is my favorite preset that I've been using the most lately. But when I first originally edited this shot, I used retro one, and I kind of want to mimic that again. So start there, bring up our exposure just a little bit, and we're going straight to the masking. So let's get our brush out, and we're gonna do, like I said before, the highlights. We want to make that image really pop. So let's get the highlights going. Get the side of the building. Some of the highlights on the bridge here. We don't have to be too meticulous. It's just a suggestion, you know. But I don't want to go too crazy because some of those nice shadows hold option for the eraser for that. And we're going to cut that out because I want some of these shadows up top on that bridge slash railway to really pop. So we're going to do that. Turn up our exposure. That looks pretty sweet. And then we're going to do the same thing. Take the brush out, but we're going to do all of the shadows. So let's get that filled in. Let's get the side of the building. Down under the bridge. Right here. Let's get a little bit up top here. Let's darken that. And that really just creates a lot of depth. Like, when you're looking at this picture and you look in the shadows, it's harder to tell. You don't really know what's there exactly. It's creating some suggestion. You're asking yourself, like, what is there? What's not there? If you want to take it that far. I mean, that's taking it to another level, obviously. But it basically is just creating separation. So we got way more separation now. So let's just turn off the masks, right? Let's add our shadows. Boom. Let's add our highlights. There's way more separation now in the foreground going into the middle of the image. because we darkened up those shadows and brought out the highlights, which looks good. I'm gonna use the linear gradient tool coming from the left side down, because that's typically, or not typically, but in this image, that's where the light's coming from. It's not exactly coming from there, because you can see from the shadow of the angle, it's coming more from that direction, but not exactly up top that high. We're just creating a suggestion to make people believe that that's accurate. That's where light's actually coming from. We like that. I'm gonna just warm up the tones a little bit to match the ground. And that looks pretty good. Do a little radial gradient on top, like we have been doing. Just darken the corners, bring your focus in, and it looks pretty sweet. Let's get our... Cine looks too fake. We want to keep this real, so I think I did move the same thing last time, but it looks good. I think it's just like, it looks like a film shot. And if you want to add some grain, I have 2 grain settings for myself here that I use sometimes. I don't really typically use them a lot, but we'll add some grain. Why not? I'll zoom in to show you guys what the grain looks like. Nothing crazy, but it makes it look more retro, like it's an actual film shot. And that kind of concludes everything, guys. So we went through all of our images. We talked about the reflections in this one and how we can kind of manipulate the sky to get some color back. We talked about the color selection tool, so we can use that to manipulate colors and stuff like that. We went through with the importance of going back and darkening your shadows, bringing out the highlights. This one, we didn't bring out any highlights because it was already a pretty bright picture, and like I said before, with the Pro Mist filter, it kind of made some stuff flat, so we don't need to go too hard on the highlights there. Same thing with this, going back, touching up the white, creating depth. And then for the nighttime photography, I mean, you can't go wrong. I love this stuff. I mean, I like shooting at night more than anything else, honestly. And even though my camera got a little screwed up from being in the rain, it was so worth it because all these shots came out awesome. Playing with the light, I like how this shot came out too, with the reflection, with the little puddles down there. Just, I don't know, I'm really happy with these shots. So, went through all that. Talked about selecting the subject, making that pop. How do we use the presets to start off with, and then going over with the color grading and our masks and stuff. So I hope that was informative for you guys. I know that we went through how to import, bring everything into both Lightrooms. You got Lightroom CC, which is what I'm using right now. You have regular Lightroom where you can actually sync up your phone and your tablet to your desktop Lightroom, and then you can have all your presets everywhere, which is nice. Talk about the website, and just going back to the website real quick, guys. It's Photo.Tripps.com. There's no dot. When you go to the website, you'll see the opening page, which is just some of my favorite shots from, you know, mostly this year, some from the past. We got the YouTube channel here. I'm gonna update this, so there's obviously the newer video, and then I got my portfolios here. So if you click New York, you know, you'll see all my New York shots, which is cool. If you guys are interested in any of that, you can also contact me here. I have a contact page. But like I said, presets, they'll be available on the website. I'm also going to attach this YouTube video to this page on the presets underneath, so if you buy the presets, you can go to the video, watch along, kind of see how to use the presets, and bring them into Lightroom and all that. If you guys ever have any questions about the presets, anything, leave a comment in this video or any video. You can always DM me on Instagram at Photo.Tripps. I've been getting a lot of questions lately about the presets, DM and on YouTube, and I'm glad to always answer anything for you guys. So I hope you enjoy the video. Hope this was informative for you guys, and until next time, Peace out. Have a good one. And I'll see you next video.